Hello again and welcome to the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today we are going to season our show with salt, a lot of salt. We are looking today at discussing issues on the Bonneville Salt Flats. They are an iconic part of our history. For years, they were a symbol in the Capitol. It talked about one of the unique things with Jenkins Mormon meteor. And there are families here in Utah that have built worldwide reputations on trying to become the fastest man on earth out on that salt. But things are not as savory as they might be, because the salt has been in a process of deteriorating now for decades. Even when people like Art Arfons and Craig Breedlove were setting records, the salt was in retreat. We're going to take a look at that today in our show. We're going to start by giving a history of some of the records set at the Salt Flats and a look at the situation that's developing.
Like a lot of races, I don't really understand what's here. We'd come out and race on white salt. Now that's kind of gone away. I don't have any answers, but I've got a lot of questions.
The Bonneville Salt Flats have been a destination for super high-speed racers for more than a century. In fact, the first land speed record was set here in 1914. Now, the flats are the perfect roadway for drivers in search of the 500-mile-per-hour mark, since the salt acts as a natural coolant to tires that would quite literally melt from friction on any other surface. But over the years, racers have begun to notice changes in the texture and amount of salt on this ancient lake bed. It's also come to their attention that the natural track just isn't as flat and as smooth as in years past. And that poses a danger to anyone racing at speeds more than 200 miles per hour. Today, a group of racers, land managers, and public officials have journeyed to this white expanse to discuss what may be causing the problem and to try to rectify it before it's too late.
We have real concerns in Utah's racing community, in fact the racing community throughout the West, on the deteriorating quality of our iconic Bonneville Salt Flats. And so we're anxious as a state to partner with the BLM and with the industry, and most importantly with our incredible racing community, to see what we can do to help rehabilitate our salt flats and get them back into pristine racing condition.
I have seen a significant change in how hard the salt is, and a couple years back in 2010, I believe, I noticed it more so on the left-hand side of our motorhome. We got a 100-gallon water tank in there, and it just had a little drip on the one side. And after about 3 days, it burned a hole in the salt, and that's when I noticed how close that salt was to that mud layer that we've been seeing today.
Racing salt here. This is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. You can tell it's got some hollow underneath. But
the reasons for the changes in salt quality and size are numerous and varied. Potash extraction has impacted the area. So has the freeway. Famous racers like Rick Vesco have spent the last few years studying core samples and the salt thickness. They're trying to determine what cause creates which effect. Evidence of the change in salt crust is readily visible in comparison photographs. These pictures are taken between 1984 and 2014. One of the problems they've discovered has to do with the ditch and culvert system that has been in place now for many decades and changes how water is distributed on the flats.
at 1901 or 2 or something, this was just bare land, nothing here. And the water is what smooths the salt flats. It blows around. But now we got it, it's like a pinball machine. It runs into this, it goes over that road, it goes down there, hits the other. Wherever the wind goes is where the water goes, and it's going to be a fun one to chase down.
The potash is getting extracted, and the salt that goes along with it is depleting the surface here.
Plans currently involve agencies and racers jointly to determine how best to mitigate all of the contributing factors and plot a course for a future where the salt flats remain intact and open to racing.
We're very concerned that we not lose this as a functioning landmark in our state. We want to preserve this and make sure it's enhanced and even better going into the future.
General public's got to help with saying, hey, we got to do something about this.
If solutions aren't agreed upon and environmental changes made soon, the racing conditions could deteriorate to the point where the 400-mile-per-hour chasers have to find another location.
People that come from around the world come to visit Bonneville, and they're not car people, they're just tourists. But they come here to visit it and take pictures, and because they know about it. To lose it would just, you just can't put that into words.
We're true racers at heart, and we want to do this bad enough. We're already talking about getting a container and taking our stuff to Australia. That we're that serious about it, you know. If there isn't going to be a place for us to run, we're already thinking about Plan B, and Plan B is Australia.
Hopefully, Plan A will succeed in replenishing the salt that has become an icon of Utah and the racing world.
Well, hopefully that's got you rubbing your hands together to find out more, and we will come back and continue our conversation on the Salt Flats and the restoration on the county seat. We'll be right back.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
Yeah, we're folks bound by traditions. Whether it's holiday time or vacation time, make sure that one of your traditions is a stop at the Creamery in Beaver, Utah. Delicious cheese direct from the factory, ice cream, tasty treats, crafts, and gifts of all kinds. And it's the perfect place to get a bowl of creamy mac and cheese. Start your new tradition the next time you're headed our way. The Creamery in Beaver, Utah. Farm, meet table.
Mountains to explore. Adventure to be had. A town to fall in love with. Yes, all that in Park City, Utah. Start planning your fall adventure at visitparkcity.com.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about the Salt Flats in Tooele County, its history and its attraction worldwide, and how it helps Tooele be the fastest place on earth. And joining us for a conversation about what to do with the Salt Flats from Tooele County, Commissioner Sean Milne, who is a longtime friend of this program, and we also have Congressman Chris Stewart, who's taken the time to stay over to do this program as well. And we have Dennis Sullivan, who is the chairman of the Save the Salt Alliance, which is a nonprofit group that is dedicated towards trying to fix the situation on the Salt Flats. So I want to start the conversation, Dennis. We understand the basics of what's happened with the deterioration of the salt. How bad is it?
The salt is so thin now that some of the cars are actually breaking through the salt, even though this year was an especially good year because of the hardness, the smoothness, and the dryness of the salt. But we had several of the cars that are fairly heavy that actually broke through the salt. If we continue the way we're going, right now we can't turn cars around for world records because there's not enough good salt on the north end of the course to give them the traction they need to get the records going the other way. If we don't fix it soon, we won't even be able to make runs one way.
So my question then would be, how did it get to this point?
They started racing on the Salt Flats in 1914. They started extracting potash in 1917. So they've been taking potash for 100 years, and we've been racing for a little more than 100 years. To get to the potash, they have to take all the minerals that are out there. The salt becomes a waste product for them because all they want is the potash. Potash makes up about 3% of the minerals that are extracted. The rest of it sits on the south side of the freeway in tailing ponds that is a waste product. We would like to see that waste product brought back to the north side of the salt flats.
We'll address that in a minute. I want to turn my attention over here. So here's the prediction for Tooele County, that the salt is continuing to deteriorate, and it doesn't sound like it's too long before you won't be able to race out there at this iconic place that's known the world over. What kind of impact does that have on Tooele County?
Well, particularly for the Wendover, Utah side, it's vital for their tourism economy as well as just the vitality of the community, so that it's not just a one side of a border town.
They'd have to rename the Speedway Cafe, wouldn't they?
Probably so. Used to be Speedway Cafe, yeah. And you know, truth be told, we have the former Miller Motorsports Park, which is now Utah Motorsports Campus in the Tooele Valley, not quite 100 miles away, where folks store their racing hardware and their cars all the way 100 miles away, still within our county. So it stimulates our county from border to border.
So we've got to this situation, and we've seen what the salt looks like from our story. How did you determine to come up with a group to do something about it?
This started actually back in the 60s with the original Save the Salt, Rick Besco, Larry Volk, and a few other racers, because of the deteriorating salt, and so trying to do something about it. They've worked with the BLM, through the BLM, they've worked with the mining companies. In 97, 98, 99, they actually worked with Riley Industries to put salt back on. They put approximately 1.5 million tons a year for 5 years. There is NASA aerial photos that show the salt flats actually grew during those 5 years. As soon as that quit, it started shrinking again.
So there's no static with the salt. It's either advancing or retreating.
Kind of that way, yes.
Kind of like a glacier.
As long as they're extracting, you know, the potash and the other things. The good news about this is there's a solution. And the solution is represented almost entirely by people here at the table, local. The only one I wish was here was the governor or some member from the state, because it's going to take local, it's going to take private, it's going to take the state, and it's going to take federal. But with a team of those working together, there's a solution here. It's not terribly expensive. It's going to take a little bit of time. You just don't go out there and sprinkle a bunch of table salt and call it good. It's going to take time to build this up again. But I think we can do that, and we're optimistic that we can not only reclaim but actually restore the salt flats to, you know, to their heyday, or at least get close to what they were at the real peak of pristineness.
This is an interesting point. I want to explore this. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back with more of the county seat, talking about the salt flats. So stay with us.
Utah has a national treasure where winding canyons stretch to the horizon, where nature forms elegant structures, and where iconic monuments of the West stand tall. Visitors around the world come to get a glimpse of southern Utah's legendary landscape and landmarks. Join them and explore San Juan County, Utah's canyon country.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're talking about the Salt Flats and an organization called Save the Salt what was it, Foundation?
Utah Alliance.
Utah Alliance Save the Salt, and their efforts to try and correct a problem that might have a grave impact on Tooele County's tourism. Dennis, you are the most knowledgeable person on the process, I think, at the table. I don't want to take anything from either of you guys, but how would this process physically work to get the tailings from the south side of the freeway back on the north side and out on the flats?
It's pretty much the same way they took it off. There are drying beds over there, and by the mining company's own documents, it's estimated there's over 200 million tons of salt that's sitting in these drying beds. They would go ahead, flood the drying beds, bring it back into a solution. They would pump it back on the salt flats. That's the only way that you could physically put 1.5 million tons back on. You couldn't haul it in trucks. You couldn't conveyor belt it. That's the only way it worked. And it has worked in the past. They've done it for 5 years. And they continue to do it now. The problem is right now the volume that they're putting out is not keeping up with the amount that's being taken off. They're putting about 300,000 back on. They need about 1.5 million per year to go back on to actually gain back.
So do they pump water, brine, off the salt flats while they're saturated, or how do they do that?
The way it works is during the winter the salt flats are completely covered with water, and the minerals come up in solution in the water. In the 60s, they dug what they call the federal collection ditch down the east side of the salt flats. It's about 17 miles long, 40 feet wide, 20 feet deep. So during the winter, that fills up with water, and then they pump it under the freeway and put it into these drying beds. And then during the spring and the summer, as the evaporation comes off, the heavier minerals fall out first, and then they pump it into the next pond, and then the potash and the calcium chloride and stuff comes out.
So if it's merely a matter of pumping it back out, and you guys are willing to put up some money, why doesn't it happen?
Well, there's a couple reasons that, at least from my perspective. One is that we need federal agencies and federal regulators to support this idea. It's BLM land, much of it at least is. And by the way, one of the initiatives we'd like to pursue is having this land be managed, be controlled by the state, make it a state park rather than a BLM land. I think we would take more interest and be better at managing it than perhaps the federal government. So we have letters and other initiatives to the Department of Interior to ask their support for what we call the Restore Bonneville project, which is this. And the second thing is it's going to take a little bit of money. It's expensive to pump, tens of millions of gallons of water. And again, that's not going to be all federal dollars. There's going to be some private money. There's going to be some from the developers out there. Hopefully we have some state money that would assist us there as well.
How much are the racers willing to contribute towards this?
When we've talked about it, we've talked about the initial cost based on what the mining company has told us that they need as far as covering up some of the ditches so they don't lose water through evaporation. That's another problem, is the water that we use to bring it back into solution. An additional pond so that they can take some of the salt that's in ponds and reprocess it and then pump that back. So based on what they're telling us, it looks like about $50 million for a 10-year project, and then after that it would be year to year depending on how well it works. We've talked to the state and asked for about $5 million from the state, and the racers, we've talked to the racers about $1 million from the racers.
Well, that's a small dent. What is the county prognosis for this?
Well, we're here mainly as a facilitator to make sure that all these varied parties that we're talking about, again, Congressman Stewart mentioned that the BLM has the greatest amount of ownership and stewardship of the salt flats. You've got private industry across the freeway that's arguably creating part of the issue. So we want to be a facilitator where it's got an obvious economic impact and quality of life to our citizens. We want to have these parties come together. Would we be willing to make a financial contribution? I'll say yes, not wanting to be held to a promise with 2 new commissioners coming in. The simple majority of us is going to change, but we recognize the value. And it's not uncommon with federal or state monies that the local jurisdiction would have some sort of match. So that's where we would expect that we would have to have some skin in the game. After all, it's going to benefit us. We love that the private sector users of the salt flats would be willing to do the same. Likewise, we would expect industry across the freeway who've been able to benefit from the lease for so long to be a part of the solution, no pun intended. And all of these parties really just need to come together. But right now, with the feds owning it, they need to step up.
Well, and they do, and we will, by the way.
Well, that wasn't a knock on Congressman Stewart. Yeah. He's been our ally. But there are some that seem to have, well, anyway, Congressman, go ahead.
And the reality is that there's a lot of things that we'd like to fund, and you can't fund them all. And I know that these gentlemen appreciate that. So what you do is you look for models that work, and this is one of the models that work. You have private interests, you have those from industry, you have those from the county, you have those from the state. The federal government can play a meaningful role in this, and they should, by the way. As we've said a number of times now, this is BLM land. And it's not just tourism for Tooele County either. There's nothing in the world like these salt flats. If we lose them, they're gone forever, and you're not going to build them somewhere else. They're not going to magically appear some other place. I think we have a real interest in the heritage and the uniqueness of this, not just for racing, but it's truly unique. And the last thing is, look, we've pushed to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a backlog of our national parks for maintenance and for facilities, as I have been a supporter of that. But this falls into that. This is something that requires maintenance, and to rebuild the facilities, it's a little bit different because it's a natural thing that we're trying to restore. It's not a bathroom, but it's still the same type of thing to enhance and to maintain and to preserve. And I think that's something we can justify spending some money on with our partners.
So I want to actually ask a couple of questions about the salt flats and its use. We have one more commercial break to take. We're going to take that right now, and we'll come back to finish the show. So we'll be right back on the county seat.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
This is what adventure looks like, and here's what it sounds like. Southwest Utah's Iron County offers some of the most iconic trails within the state that include 200 miles of new trails to be discovered. Check out ironcounty.net for info and interactive maps for your complete guide to off-roading. Explore countless miles of trails in the heart of Dixie National Forest, the gateway to Utah National Parks, Iron County.
There are meetings, and then there are gatherings. At the Davis Conference Center, we know the difference. Turn your event into something more than just another business summit. With over 70,000 square feet of flexible meeting space, state-of-the-art presentation amenities, and inspiring architecture, the Davis Conference Center is designed to deliver stellar results in a majestic setting. Take your convention to the next level. Schedule now at davisconferencecenter.com.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're having a conversation about saving the salt flats, and yes, they are in some jeopardy. And there's been a lot of effort by a lot of parties, including the people that mine the area or take brine off of it, to find a solution. Dennis, I want to go back and talk particularly about how that salt gets used. Obviously, the potash developers, Intrepid, are looking to pull the saline off in the wet months, process it, get the potash out, return the salt. Obviously, everybody knows the racers use it, and it's pretty familiar. How far away did people come for the racing events this year?
Over the years, I've looked at the pre-entries, just the pre-entries. This isn't tourists. We have had people come from 11 countries and 26 states to come and race on the Salt Flats. In August, you'll have 600 competitors. Commissioner Millen talked about some of the people storing their cars. I know there's a group from New Zealand that come and keep their car there year-round. They just bring a different motor. And there's several other people from other countries that will leave their cars here in different places just so they can continue to race at the Salt Flats.
And this just isn't a racetrack either. There are other activities that take place out there?
Yes, many activities. There's 5 major race events, but there's also an ultra-marathon running event. There's a national rocket competition. The Longbow World Championship is held out there, which incidentally a gentleman has actually fired an arrow over a mile. There is
They'll make
movies.
a movie out of that one.
There's movies, commercials. Once you've been out there and you start watching TV, you'll see half the movies are filmed on the Salt Flats, or half the commercials are filmed on the Salt Flats. Wedding photos. It's used as soon as the water's off. It's starting to get used, and it's used until the water comes back.
So what's the structure of the solution? How do we actually do this? You got $50 million. Intrepid's got to build some infrastructure to get it back out there.
Well, I was just going to say that there's going to have to be some federal appropriations, and we're working on that through the appropriations committee that I sit on. But we need to have, I think, an agreement with Intrepid and some of the other commercial interests, and a basic framework of the cost sharing and who will have responsibilities in the construction and some of the details worked out.
Okay. Any other comments for this?
The mining people they want a solution. They'll put up all the salt without any charge. They'll provide the infrastructure and the process. They just need somebody to pay for the actual pumping, to pay for, again, like I said, one of the problems is water. We have to have the water to go back on the salt. So they want to cover up some of the ditches so they don't lose it through evaporation and down through the ground. So they are willing to work, the state's willing to work, the racers are willing to work.
Good. Sounds like there's a solution there.
I love the use of the pun repeatedly. Good job.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us for the county seat. We appreciate your involvement. We hope that we have inspired you with the stories about the salt and what its connection to our history is out here, and the fact that it's become iconic. Remember, when you get involved in local situations and local issues, you really are engaged in the process of local governance, and that's what the county seat is all about. We appreciate your joining us every week. We invite you to join us on social media. We welcome your comments, and we will look for you next week right here on the county seat.